Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last Physics Chat of Series 3. Physics Chat is a series where we talk to physicists about their life and their research. Today, I will be your host, and my co-hosts are Joe and Nathan.
Hello.
Hello.
Our guest today is Matt, who is a PhD student at the University of Glasgow and works in optics. So how are you, Matt?
I'm good, thank you, Fox. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great, thank you. So let's get straight onto the physics. Could you briefly describe your research for us?
So I am attempting to replicate how the human eye works by using neural networks and SPAD array cameras, which can detect individual photons. SPAD stands for Single Photon Avalanche Diode.
That sounds really interesting, but really complex. Could you tell us a little bit about what a photon is?
So a photon is a packet of energy. I guess as humans, we most commonly understand or see photons as light. We've got the visible spectrum, which humans can sense from red to violet, and then there's the non-visible light. On one end, there's infrared as the wavelength increases, and there is ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays as the wavelength decreases. I mentioned wavelengths, however, I should point out that photons, they exhibit wave-particle duality. They can be described as both particle and as a wavelength. They have a frequency and a wavelength, just as a wave. However, they have a set travel path and a detection time, just like a particle does, which is what I use for my research. The famous Young's double slit experiment shows this duality perfectly. When you have two slits and you pass light through it, the wave nature of light shows, and you can see diffraction on the other side from the constructive and destructive interference. However, when you observe which slit the particle travels through, this wave nature collapses as you're observing the particle, and so this is the particle nature of light. In my research, we treat photons as particles, however, we still refer to their wavelength and frequency.
Okay, so we see these photons as light. How do humans actually process this? How do we see?
So I think the easiest way, let me explain this with an analogy. So bear with me in a bit, and then you'll see why I'm explaining this. So when the Royal Mail receive post, everyone goes and puts their post in a post box. That post goes to a local sorting office and then is sent out to the posties to go deliver to people's houses. This is similar to how the eye works. Your rod and cone cells detect a bunch of incoming photons. Your rod cells is what you see directly in front of you, whereas your cone cells are what you see in your peripheral vision. This would be the equivalent of people delivering letters to a post box. Signals from your rod and cone cells are then sent to a group of cells at the back of your eye called your retinal ganglion cells. They put together features from what you're seeing. Or I guess for the sake of our analogy, they sort the information received from rods and cones, just like a sorting office would sort the post. These retinal ganglion cells are specialized in picking out a specific feature from what you're seeing, be it the edges of something, the color of something, the texture of something. Different ones are specialized in different things. Finally, this image from the retinal ganglion cells gets sent to a specific location, the visual cortex of your brain, just as letters get sent to each person's house. Where this analogy now breaks down is that technically your brain then puts all these little bits together and forms a large image, whereas in real life people don't get all their posts together and make one giant letter or something.
Thanks. That's a really nice way of putting something. I've not really heard anything about how the eye works. That was really helpful. But then you mentioned that part of your research is trying to replicate how the human eye works. So can you tell us a bit about what you're trying to do in that area?
So the SPAD camera, as I mentioned earlier, the SPAD replicates your rod and cone cells. The central pixels of the camera are the rod, as we can model them to see what's exactly in front of us, whereas the outer pixels are the cones, what our peripheral is. We have a neural network behind it to replicate the retinal ganglion cells. It's going to take information from the SPAD camera. It will perform some function on it to output some processed data that will emphasize a specific feature of what the SPAD camera is looking at. The camera part of things is relatively simple. The SPAD already models what rod and cone cells do pretty well. However, replicating the retinal ganglion cells is the largest challenge and is what my project is more focused on doing. Another slight issue we have in this project is, because this is based off neuroscience and neuroscience is very complicated, we technically don't entirely know how retinal ganglion cells work and how the human vision system works, or not in its entirety anyway. So while we're making this model, we don't entirely know what we're trying to model, but it doesn't dissuade us from trying to give it a go anyway.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. If you want to learn more about neural networks, we have a video on the channel already, see up in the corner, that we talk about neural networks in more detail with gravitational waves. So you focused your research on these SPAD cameras. So how does a normal camera capture an image compared to these specific ones?
A normal camera has a 2D sensor where each pixel on the sensor detects a photon simultaneously, and it builds up a 2D image from that. When one pixel is triggered, all pixels are triggered. There's no some are on, some are off, all are on, or all are off. A SPAD, or in this case, a SPAD array, because the camera is made up of multiple SPADs all put in an array, can trigger independently to each other SPAD. And so every time one photon gets detected on one area, it can instantaneously send a signal to the neural network behind it, as opposed to a normal camera, which it would have to, every single pixel would have to trigger, as opposed to a SPAD. Our eyes work like a SPAD, or like a SPAD array like this. Whenever a rod on code cells detects a photon, it instantly sends out a signal to our retinal ganglion cells behind it, or in case of our model, a SPAD would instantly send a signal to the neural network behind it.
I guess linked to what you said, the human eye is also very good at getting depth and working out how that all is relevant. So how does this system, how does this network get a 3D image? How do you end up getting a 3D image when normally cameras only get 2D ones?
LiDAR works through time of flight. So the laser source is a pulsed laser. Instead of sending out one continuous beam, it sends out pulses of light. Every time it fires a pulse of light, it sends a signal to the SPAD. The laser sends a signal to the SPAD. The SPAD starts counting, and then it measures the incoming photons. The timer is running so that it knows the delay between the signal arriving and every single photon arriving. And from that, it creates a histogram. It knows the delay between the signal arriving and every single photon arriving. And from that, it creates a histogram. And now this histogram is how far away each photon had to travel. And so it can generate a point cloud, which gives an image of the scene we're looking at.
Okay, so being a physics chat, we have an obligatory random question. Despite the fact that we actually did the same undergraduate degree, I think I became friends with you through the Tabletop Society. So why do you enjoy tabletop role-playing games?
They're very different to what a lot of other things we do in our real life, right? As I don't know, social media, TV, video, not all video games, but a lot of video games, a lot of them are very linear, right? As in, you don't need much brain power to do them. Role-playing games require you to use your brain a lot. They require you to think on the spot and to use your imagination, and it's a different kind of brain usage. And it's also the imagination part of it as well. Like, sure, you do get some video games or that you do have to use imagination, but they're still limited to a certain extent. With role-playing games, it's unlimited. You can think of anything and you can try to do anything. Now, there is certain restrictions, but like also there really isn't. I'm sure if there's something you want to do, you could almost certainly find a game or something that will allow you to do it.
Yes, a good example of that, in a campaign I was playing, we were trapped outside of a city. We thought we wouldn't be allowed back into the city, so I was turned into a fish. I had to swim upriver to get to the city. My character was significantly traumatized by the event.
I remember this, yes.
Nice. That sounds super fun, actually. I'll maybe need to give it a go at some point. So we've talked about your interests, Matt. We've also talked about your research. I was wondering if there was anyone in particular that might have inspired you to go into physics when you were younger?
The person who inspired me to go into physics was my secondary school teacher. He was a really cool guy. Like, I remember doing my GCSEs in physics, and I think, ironically, physics was one of the one of my worst GCSEs that I did, but I enjoyed it so much. It was so fun. He was a really cool guy. He was always very enthusiastic and always put a lot of effort into his work. There were times where, like, I remember we were learning about microwaves at one point, and he brought in a physical microwave to show us like what happens if you put certain things on. And he told us that he was scrapping the microwave. And so we proceeded to spend a lesson just putting random things in a microwave to see what effect it had on them. The last one was we put some forks and spoons in the microwave, and as you might guess, the microwave didn't exist for much longer. But he enjoyed it as well. This wasn't a case of just like it was something for us to do and he was just sat there waiting for it to happen. He was like trying to look to see what was happening himself as well. And like that passion, that enjoyment of a teacher showing it to a student, I think is it is inspiring. It genuinely inspired me to go into physics.
That's really cool. I think teachers can definitely make or break your interest in a subject. So that's nice you had such a good one. Do you have any advice for anyone that might be considering research at the moment?
Yes, enjoy enjoy what you're doing. I think one of the biggest things is in research, as I'm sure all three of you know, you will fail. You will get stuck on stuff. You will spend months trying to get something to work that should have taken you a week, or getting a bug out of your code or something along those lines. And I think the thing that gets you through all of that is enjoying what you're doing. If you're stuck for a month trying to do something that you can't do, it's a lot easier to do that when you know that it's a subject that you enjoy. If it's something you enjoy, you're probably going to be surrounded by people with the same subject that are also going to enjoy it as you. And so being around people that also are similar minded to you and also want to do what you're doing will also help. They will encourage you and they will help you out, and it will just make your life a lot more enjoyable and a lot more easier, I guess.
Yes, I can agree to that testament. Being surrounded by other people who do similar subjects to you. When you all have a bad day, you can commiserate and go to the pub and go, didn't we all have a bad week or day? But then when someone gets something, it's a great feeling of triumph when someone actually achieves something in their PhD. Yes, so that was really interesting. Thank you, Matt, for coming and talking about your research. Yeah, it was really interesting to learn how these specific cameras and some neural network magicry, that's not a word.
I quite like magicry.
Magicry.
I love magicry works, but yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
It was great to learn about cameras and how these specific SPAD cameras can, with some neural network magicry, can replicate the function of an eye. That was really fascinating to learn about. I hope the research goes well. It sounds very exciting. Sadly, though, this is the end of series 3, well, we will be back soon with more interviews. But if you've enjoyed this series, please like, subscribe, comment. Always appreciate those, boost the algorithm. And thank you and see you then. Bye.
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 We don't entirely know what we're trying to model, but it doesn't dissuade us from trying to give it a go anyway.